Welcome to the Progress Report. I'm Sarah B. Nelson, and I'm your host. Kyndryl has just released the 2026 People Readiness Report, and one of the findings is that 46% of leaders say that ethical and responsible AI, so things like bias, transparency, explainability, trust, is one of the biggest barriers to executing their AI strategy. So today we're going to dig into what it really takes to scale AI responsibly without compromising security. So to unpack this question, I'm joined by Dia Nguyen. She's the responsible AI lead at Amazon Web Services, and my colleague Tony DeBose, who's a global go-to-market and consult leader for security and resiliency here at Kyndryl. So welcome, Dia and Tony.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Hi, happy to be here. Interesting topic to talk about today.
So let's jump right in. Kyndryl just released the 2026 People Readiness Report, and one of the clear takeaways from it was that many companies have rushed into AI, and they're now in this sort of sense-making phase. They have lots of pilots, and how do you move beyond that? How does this track with what you're seeing, Dia?
I think it's very consistent. Organizations rushed in. Boards were demanding folks to have AI strategies. Perhaps budgets were being reallocated. We've seen a number of pilots launched that didn't produce the kind of results or return on investment. And I think in the context of that sort of urgency, something fundamentally was abandoned. And I think it's first like asking this question as to just because AI can doesn't mean it should, and asking whether like this is the appropriate tool, and do we have the right problem to solve, and is it clear that we will have a path to actually seeing the kind of return that organizations are expecting.
No, it's interesting now. It was beautiful weather here in Switzerland, so I went with friends to the park, and we had this interesting discussion about AI. And I think all of them, they were saying, yeah, we see the value, but we are not trusting it. We don't know what is happening, and we had a really interesting discussion because they were not convinced. And I think as Dia is saying, there is a lot of technology push. New technology, we should do it, we should bring it, I think there is a promise. But we forget to communicate to the people that needs to use it and show it to them how it can help and support them. Because for me, it was an eye-opener, because I'm super excited. I like technology, so I was talking really excited about AI. But
and that's probably true for a lot of us, right? That are technologists. My background is computer science. I've been in technology all of my career. I've not done anything else for the last 3 decades. And so I'm sure there's a degree of excitement for us, but how do we bring other people along that journey, especially when the public discourse, right? And a lot of what is elevated in communications is something that is much more risky for them or potentially impactful to them in ways that they can't fully contain or don't fully understand, or sounds like a risk to, them and their future. I think it's important for our language around this to shift and to change, right? Efficiency isn't the goal, and we're going to incentivize, right, what value we create, what other new opportunities open up as a result of the productivity gains that we provide for teams and for structures. What could we do now that we couldn't do before? And I know as a developer in the past and managing teams, we've had a backlog, right, of all of the features, functionality, capability, new services that we would have hoped to be able to deliver, and ways that we could have impact to our customers and to the business that often were deprioritized. Are those things that we can now tap into that become, opportunities for the business once we take care of, once we've gained, productivity or have productivity gains. And I think that's part of the shift beyond just the efficiency play.
In terms of intentionality, which we talked about, where are you seeing discussions emerging around intentionality and responsible AI?
I would say I see it often because it is core to the conversation that I have with organizations and with government agencies and policymakers. is to actually talk about intentionality. And I think that it's the difference between like what is strategy and then what is sort of real meaningful implementation, right? It's the difference between that. But I think that the intentionality helps us to make the kind of active, informed and deliberate decisions about how AI is being designed for those that are building applications or how it is being developed and deployed. And I think the deployment part is important as well, because we can design a system and test it with the kinds of guardrails in place, and in its deployment still not get used in a way that's beneficial or that has the intended impact or might have some unintended consequence. My hope is, in a lot of the conversations I have, is that we actually shift to more intentional, responsible implementation or design in the beginning stages of our thinking, right? And conceptualizing what's going to be delivered or what's being released. And unfortunately, the speed with which we've chased after the technology, some of the intentionality, that deliberate, well-informed decision-making hasn't occurred.
I see two situations happening often. So first of all, it has been built with a really narrow focus. There is a certain outcome and they focus on the outcome, and they do everything with that, and they almost get this tunnel vision. But then if you deploy it in the wild, suddenly they were not considering that you could do many other things with it. That they were not really, because they were just so focused, and there's so much pressure. We need to have the outcome. We need to have the value. I need to show to my shareholders I'm using successfully. But they forgot. They then forget, that you might do a lot of other things. But here is also, they start, the intention might be good. I want to do this process, credit scoring, or, fraud cases. And the intention starts good, but then they feel the power of AI, and before you know it, in the project itself, it shifts into directions that you really need to think. Is this something that I as a client, or I as a employee, or a citizen of the government, do I really want this? And if you do it, at least tell me, or that I have a choice to do those things. But the power is that the technology is sometimes, with privacy, we already saw it, all the data, we can do so much with it. But then they get too excited, positively speaking, and I think then easily we get through all kinds of ethical boundaries that we need to think, is this really, what we want?
So, Tony, you were mentioning data privacy, which puts me in the mind of cybersecurity. And I'm curious what the implications are for cybersecurity here.
We can speak for hours about that. For certainly, we already had this risks with LLMs, but now with agents, the sky's the limit, at least risk-wise. How do we identify agents? What kind of access do agents have? Do they have access to data? In LLMs, you already did the discussion that data was, used, was there consent to use the data? Data is being combined. It certainly without combining, it was okay. But combining, suddenly you get this privacy risk, because you can make it really meaningful. But an agent, what kind of access does have an agent? Can an agent give data from one agent to another agent? Agents can get stalled. So at least from a technical security point of view, there are already a lot of security risks that you need to consider. But now is there the concept of transparency, when I programmed and you build something, you could follow step by step how the program was going. With a model, there's so many knots, and you don't know exactly, what is happening there. And with the result that, accountability, who's accountable, and fairness, which is for me a really interesting topic, a complex topic in AI, when we are always making straightforward decisions, and when get we into are we fair enough? And unfortunately, over and over again, we see if we get insensitive domains, okay, fairness is at risk, I would say. So
Early in my career, I was working when we started to help businesses reimagine their operations and business and their reach with the internet, right? And we started to build HTML pages, and then it went to other sort of web programming that was being done. And then came WYSIWYG editors, right? And suddenly you didn't need to know how to code. You didn't need to really even understand any of the underlying infrastructure related to the web. You could build a web page. You could perhaps even integrate payments so that you would have some sort of e-commerce system, right? But the challenge was that in our democratizing access to this new technology, we had individuals that didn't understand programming principles, didn't know anything about security, and they were generating things or building things that introduced a new wave of vulnerabilities that ultimately drove us to like SSL and HTTPS to be able to, and I believe even accelerated the field of cybersecurity, right? And we learned that the hard way by democratizing a technology and a platform without building guardrails, right? So it created opportunity, but then it created risk at scale. And now we're doing exactly the same thing with no code, low code, vibe coding platforms. But again, with the scale, speed, and scope or reach of AI, right? It's to me, we didn't learn enough from history, right? And I think that we need to go back and keep looking at some of the pages of technological advancement over the last whatever years and really start to unpack like the intentionality with which we're releasing and providing this extraordinary capability in the hands of people that don't understand the implications of what they're building. And so I think that is a challenge, right? I would say like democratization without having the guardrails isn't empowerment in the way that we think about it, because it's just increasing our risk and exposure at levels that we're finding we can't even contain.
I think interesting enough, AI gives also a lot of opportunities. If we look at the Midas model, it will help to build better software, and other models will come. I mean, for sure, and that will for sure help to build better software. But on the other side, it also creates, for me, serious concerns. It's a hot topic with a lot of our clients because it will be used by people which we don't like to use it. And although we try to restrict it, the world was changed, and I'm not sure that we are ready of the dark side of these models and how it will impact not an organization but society as for us. It's going so fast and so powerful, and like models that we thought that they were doing what we're asking for them, but then they still escape the guardrails. We building strong guardrails. Everybody's talking about guardrails, and I think guardrails can do a lot of things. But if models become more stronger, we also need to build stronger guardrails. And I think, as Dia is saying, we always put about the functionality, and it's always the same. I'm already 30 years now in security somehow. Security always comes seconds as well, and then we say, maybe it escapes this escape is environment. No, maybe the guardrails are not effective. We just presume and focus on functionality and technology and bring that forward. So,
yeah. So maybe this actually points to another question to your point of because use the internet example. I'm also thinking about content and social media, same like these rushes, these like gold rushes to these new things without thinking about unintended consequences or some consequences that were pretty obvious. I think from the start. But anyway, I think what I'm wondering is that if an organization reframes the way that they think about these challenges in terms of trust in people, how does that change their decision making?
I think the questions that are being asked fundamentally change. If we're thinking about like responsible AI and focusing on trust in people, I think our focus often isn't and Tony was just saying this, right, about the cool technology, about the expected end in terms of the financial benefit or gain, the competitive advantage. And I guess I would imagine that the questions change to one, not just trying to ensure that we are being legally defensible in the context of like, do we meet our compliance standards, right? Because some people do think of responsible AI that way, but more, are we genuinely, building trust to people that would be affected by or use the technology that we build? And one of the other things that I think, and I often encourage people to do, is also to look at who are the stakeholders you intend not to serve, so that you make sure that you're intentionally not creating harmful conditions for them, right? So it's, and even when we're framing some of our design, it's like the things outlining what we want and making sure that we also outline the behaviors and the functions we don't want, as a way to counter some of the unintended consequence. And then I think the other piece of this is really when an organization is reframing, like, and focusing on trust, then the transparency is going to be there, or they're going to see that as a key element of their strategy. Because I do think that that's foundational, and Tony already mentioned that that's foundational to building trust. When we understand how it's being used, when it's clear about what data has been leveraged for that, and what outcomes that's going to produce, and what my means are to be able to contest or opt out of its use. All of those things in the context of transparency, I believe, help people to trust. But these are questions that are not afterthoughts. Again, these are things that are being prioritized as considerations in our overall strategy and the design that will flow through, the entire sort of value chain.
No, I cannot agree more with for me, it's really the tone at the top, It's a cultural thing, and the tone at the top needs to say, we find this important. In everything you do, you need to consider this. Unfortunately, what I've seen when culture changes, first they need to hit their head hard somewhere. Things go wrong. There was this case where they were building, it was already in early days, a few years ago, and they had this application for banking to give good advices, It was really meant, nowadays it would be really innocent, but back then it was new. And then people were thinking, but you are coming into our privacy. What are you doing? And before you know it, was a big media spectacle, and it comes in politics and questions around that. And then that made the company change, say, okay, we need to have this ethical boards. We need to consider about the consequence. As Dia is saying, not only the intentional, but the unintended audience, and also if we feel that it's not good, we need to escalate it upwards so we can discuss it and make it more. But unfortunately, often what we are seeing, in cybersecurity, first you need to head before the change. I would really hope that boards not only say, hey, we need to get the effectiveness or even worse, the efficiency of AI, but yes, let's do it in a responsible way. Let's, as the tone of the top, for me, but that's more, me as human in this society.
I think this goes back to that whole question of incentivizing at what we incentivize, right? Because what you described is the carrot and stick, right? So we have to wait for some consequence and before there's the response that is expected, as opposed to being appropriately incentivized to do the right things in the beginning. And I think it is unfortunate that some of that hasn't always come to play. I think that there have been some opportunities or steps in the direction, right, where you have some of organizations, some of the tech companies, most of them have, committed to agreed to voluntary commitments in terms of safety and sharing information and doing degrees of testing with their models or in frontier development, right? Those are, I think, some intentional steps sort of forward looking, perhaps, prior to all of the consequence, but not enough of that is being done. And in organizations, I think it is thinking about, now you're devising an AI strategy, that this sort of grounding in responsible AI, responsible innovation, considering trust, should be a part of that strategy that gets, propagated throughout the organization and throughout like what is being implemented and what is being incentivized in the end.
So, I think you're pointing to this kind of last question, I think, to really close this out is what does progress look like? So what are some of the clear signals that organizations have in place that mean they're truly ready to scale AI responsibly?
First of all, adopt responsible AI top down, make it a priority in your organization. And secondly, spend significant time in making people aware of what you're trying to do. Be transparent on implementing AI agents in your organization. And often what I see, like the hyperscalers and the LM companies, they take it seriously, but it's up to us, also take those functionalities there to implement them, and do that. And on the other hand, listen to your employees, to the ones that are going to use it, and make it transparency, for me, is the key word. Transparency in everything will really help that you can scale AI, in a responsible way. But that comes automatically if you follow that path. So
I think that organizations thinking about scaling AI and doing that responsibly, what the future of that looks like is actually considering this as another step in digital transformation. This is organizational change. And so that requires, culture adjustment. And you can't have culture alignment or a culture adjustment without including your people, right? And so I think that the inclusion of people, the people-centered focus or customer-centered focus has to be a part of that. But thinking about like culture is more than just, we have principles defined, or that we have, outlined responsible AI practices, but that those things are actually being communicated throughout the organization top down, that there is the kind of training and awareness campaigns that are necessary, that we're bringing people along the journey and understanding, so that they help to understand what's in it for them and how they progress and where they can see themselves, that we're investing in our people as we're making transitions, because we understand that, that there's a responsibility in our organization to be able to help people along while they're adopting or reskilling, upskilling, to be able to, adjust to the changes that are being made, that we're incorporating the kind of transparent communication and engagement that's necessary to, again, bring people along, that we make clear the kind of accountability that's necessary, right? When things go wrong, and we have these structures in place, that we actually are being thoughtful about when. And I think I would go back to when AI is used, and I would go back to my one of the early comments that I made, and then we asked the question, just because it can doesn't mean it should. Like, should we use this? And then were there places where we can't contain the risks or we don't understand those well, perhaps that's an opportunity for us to say no or not right now, because again, that is a readiness and a maturity question. And we're moving way too quickly, putting it in every place for everything without consideration of what that means in the long term.
So I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you both for such a great discussion. I feel like we could have talked about this for hours. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Progress Report. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share, like, and subscribe. You can find this episode on any podcast platform. And if you'd like to go deeper into how organizations are preparing their workforces for AI, check out Kyndryl's People Readiness Report. You'll find the link in the description below.